Welcome to Into the Words, a podcast from the Highlights Foundation Retreat Center. Today in the cabin is our dear friend, Ashley Hope Perez. Welcome, Ashley.
Hi.
So this is pretty cool because we just got started and Ashley just started going for it. And so we've actually recorded this intro after the spot and now we're going to put it back at the beginning.
But yeah, so I feel this sort of sense of the specialness of the place, but also how important it is for writers' journeys to sustainable writing lives, like writing lives that are actually healthy and whole, instead of built on that kind of sacrifice model, which I'm not a fan of. I don't think it's good for people, and I think there's no good reason to suffer doing something when you could experience joy doing it. So I think this is a place where the hard work and the joy connect up really well. So
yeah, thank you. It's nice to think about that nurturing and feeling like this is a place that re-energizes you for that passion.
And it's not just, it's the food is amazing, of course, but the space is really special. And what I think the other thing is what it brings out in everyone in this space to be taken care of and to be remembering what it is to be taken care of. Mm-hmm. And I think faculty are able to be generous in this space in a way that's not possible when you're not lifted out of your regular life. So when I teach a one-day thing or a 2-day workshop, I'm not removed from the ordinary demands the way that when I come here, I know I'm ready to be in this space, and I'm ready to be available to writers in a different.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. You're able to kind of pull yourself out of everything
and
else.
It's something. It's not like it's it's great to turn off the email or try to disconnect from things, but I think it's really that it's not just the attendees who are getting what they need here. Faculty are getting something that they need here, and when our needs are met, we're much better able to serve others. So I think that's y'all are doing so many things right. But
thank you.
Okay.
So what?
The topic.
Let's just keep going.
Okay.
So I was just talking to Anna Marie McLemore, and she was actually talking about she just wrote a revision plan, and she feels like she's in lockstep with the students this week. So what are you up to this week? Do you have a personal project that you've brought, or?
I think I am doing a little bit of work of my own, and I'm in a bit of an in-between spot where I'm just building towards the next 2 projects, and but what I've been doing is all of the exercises that the students are doing, which I find always and forever is good for me. I never get tired of exercises, and I actually have made a deck of craft prompts from the faculty lectures, so just a sort of different ideas, so that we were discussing how sometimes when you sit down to work on a scene, there's this feeling of like I have to achieve mastery on all of these different fronts.
Yeah.
And we ultimately do, but that doesn't all have to happen in that draft. But it can help to have one focal point or one constraint. So the talk on dialogue and increasing tension with dialogue, I got a few sort of reminders like what's the role of gesture in this exchange? So thinking about how much of the responding could I do with gesture instead of actual words. And so that's a point that came up in the craft talk. But if I'm having a day where I feel like I need to feed something into the process, give myself a focal point, I can just take the next card off of the deck and I have something like that to remind me, oh yeah, I know a lot about this business. And I think that I actually my project the last 3 times that I've been, the 3 times I've been here, I guess every time I've been to Highlights, I feel like my project has been extending my roots as a writer and being clear about what my priorities are, why I'm doing this work, and how I want to do it going forward. And for me, a lot of that's about writing in a way that's healthy. It's recognizing how to have, how to do work that's hard, but in a way that's gentle. So I have I think a pretty long history of kind of wringing work out of myself, I don't know how to say it except like you don't do a graduate program and write a dissertation and apply for jobs and write a novel all at the same time without sort of pushing yourself past some limits.
Right.
And what I've been working on in the past few years is learning how to be peaceful about what I can do and how I can do it, and be happy. And I feel when I come here, I'm reminded of all the reasons why I have to do this work, I want to do this work, and that I can do it in a way that's healthy. So it's I think it's something I want for all of the writers, and I'm always have this sort of like strong feeling of protecting people from pain that's avoidable. And there's some pain that's not avoidable, like growing is painful. But there's the pain of growing, and then there's the pain of sacrifice. And I have discovered, and some of the work that I've done here, I've been working on some shorter things, and it's been really great to have the experience of writing a whole piece with work and challenge, but not suffering.
Right.
I guess my Ashley of a few years ago wouldn't quite believe that, this sort of idea of like suffering and success were kind of intertwined, and I'm very happily disentangling
Pulling
them.
that apart so
Yeah.
that you can find the joy in it.
Yeah, so to answer the question more directly, I feel a lot of people come to highlights with a specific goal. I want to get this draft off the ground, or I want to get this revision in order. And I think, there have been times that I've been here that I was maybe a little more in that space. But recently it has been more about the process. So how am I engaging in this process? And I actually was talking about that with the revision talk, that when we learn how to really invest in a process that works, and we get get our attention or our fixations off of the product, we can have an experience that's more humane, and the product will follow.
I was going to say, and then you get a better
absolutely,
better outcome.
Because you can produce things out of fear, but what you produce, I think there's a real ceiling on that kind of work. And the work that comes from, even if the writing might be about painful things, work that comes from a place of expansiveness and possibility is going to be qualitatively different than work that comes from a place of fear or protectiveness or anxiety about how things will be received. You are good at making people be brave here, I think. It's a good place for people to come and recognize that they can be bolder than they thought, I think.
That's awesome. I hope so. And I don't know how that happens. I think it's the magic of the Highlights Foundation. And I like to tell the story that I think it's because of 75 years of people coming to this property thinking about story and thinking about creating story for children and young adults.
Yeah.
And everybody that comes adds their little bit of residue, and so there's just this magic air here.
Well, that magic air, magic water, when I said that example of in challenge, I picture myself, the first time I was here, I walked out in my rain boots, and it was kind of chillier, so I wasn't barefoot, but I was standing in the creek, and I had kind of memorized that sensory experience. I was like, this is where I'm rooted, and I think there is something, it sounds a little new agey or whatever, but I think it's something real to the lives that have moved through this space and what they've brought, and it's palpable. I feel like that that this is a project with many people who've contributed, and that it's important, and that it's alive. Like, it's not a. I think that's the thing too about was saying that here people can be bold. I think something I see in on other spaces I teach in is this kind of obsessive attention to the market, and the market matters. Like, people need to think about what's going to sell, or how their book fits in genre or in age category. But I think that when people come here, when writers come here, that loosens enough that they can begin to think about how their stories can be bold, how they can matter in ways beyond what they originally conceived of. And that's always where I want my students to be, is thinking about how this work matters.
And there's two ways to come at that, or there's the craft piece of it, and I like to think there's a lot of deep geeky conversation about craft.
Sure.
And whatever your
it's not like,
is,
let's all hold hands.
It's all craft, but it's driven by that passion for your story. And when you have that story that you're passionate about, and then you're talking about this craft, you've got your opportunity to really blossom while you're here.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about, what was your lecture?
So I gave the opening talk on revision, and I think of it as the sort of invitation to the process of the week, which is, revision, sort of the word revision even is asking us to think about what does it mean to see our work again. And so writers, so understandably, often upon completing a first draft of a novel, feel they've written the novel. And so a huge piece of setting expectations and really bringing new novelists into the realities of writing a book is accepting that a draft is an incredibly important step, but that a draft is not the same thing as a book. And so that when we've written a first draft, we have made an incredible accomplishment. And the next piece of the journey is carrying that draft forward into the next draft and the next one on this sort of path of indeterminate length to what will be the book.
Yeah.
And so I think I have a passion for communicating to people who've done something hard that they can do something else that's hard, which is revision. So we're inviting writers in, and we care about their work very much, and we want to help them see the possibilities in their first draft, but also kind of hold it loosely enough that instead of clinging to the draft and what they'd imagined or what they'd intended, they're able to move to the what's next, which is what they're going to do going forward. And so I hope I set the groundwork for the other faculty by putting students in the frame of mind that I'm now looking at this great thing I did, which is a draft of my novel, and I'm combing it for clues about what's next for the writing, and I'm listening to all of these craft talks and thinking, wow, what are all the ways I'm going to approach these scenes differently now that I know that? And I'm hearing from my faculty mentor about pacing and about drama, and now I know in the next draft I'm really going to focus on these three things, or whether a given writer might need to be focusing on character development, or they may have a real issue with how chapters are organized or the structure, but creating a manageable entry point to the revision, and then making this week all about real progress and excitement and connection with other writers. So I kind of, in my talk, I give my favorite metaphor for first drafts, which is that first drafts are, I'll try it again so I can get it all together. So my favorite metaphor for the first draft is that the first draft is like a cake that you baked in an unfamiliar kitchen with a blindfold on and without a recipe. So when I talk to people about a draft, like what a draft is, and its relationship to what a book is, what I'm hoping they'll understand is that like what they made looks like a book in some ways, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not what you're going to serve your reader, right? This is an experimental early step. So I give the example of like, I'm like super proud of my first draft, my carrot cake, and it's got like a whole carrot in it and an unshelled walnut and a rubber band and some other mystery things in there. So I know that this is, when I look at it and I take it apart, it's going to tell me something about the kind of cake that I was trying to make. And I'm going to discover, oh man, I thought that was the sugar canister, but it turned out to be the salt jar. Right. And so there's a lot of things that are really not working in this cake. But there's a lot in there that's going to tell me about my next try, what I'm going to do. And there's a lot that I can use. I'm like, man, okay, so I need to grate those carrots. That didn't work when I put them in whole. But I've got knowledge about, I am definitely trying to make a carrot cake. Got it. So that's, I have a passion for involved metaphors that I think are very helpful and that other people can take or leave. But that's one of my offerings, because I think everyone can understand that the miracle really is that you baked anything at all. The miracle really is that we finish a draft at all, and then we try it. We go in there and we see what did we make, and we make a plan for the next round.
And Anna Marie was just talking about this idea where you don't always know what, like you said, that canister of sugar was actually salt, or right. Until you finished that draft and had a little time to sit with it and started with some critiquing and some feedback. Somebody's
gonna, I know this isn't the cake I serve my readers, but there are a few people who can help me out, and I take a bite of it and they're like, Ashley or Anna Marie, you did not put sugar in this. This is something else. They give you feedback. And that's actually another point that came up in the talk that is really important for people entering a revision stage in a serious way, is that feedback is information. And feedback from their faculty is likely information about changes that they need to make. But we sometimes involve other people in our writing. And so I give the example of, the reader who says, man, I really wanted to know what the character looked like on page 1. I would love it if you had them a scene where they looked in the mirror and described themselves. Like there's information there that this person or this reader, or maybe readers in general, want a sense of the characters having a body. But the suggestion, like have them look in the mirror and describe themselves, probably not what the writer should do, right? And so the other piece that I hope writers develop during their time in the whole novel workshop, and when I work with them in general, is more discernment, so that they're not waiting for instructions from someone else, but that they're taking feedback in and then sort of discerning what choices do I make with this feedback that are consistent with my growing knowledge of craft and my intentions for this story. So it's a good thing to be getting a lot of feedback from a lot of different sources like they do in the whole novel workshop, because that's a great opportunity to practice and to see also how other people are taking up feedback and using it.
And I think so, and Sarah Aronson's going to talk to us, I think, a little bit later, but I forget what she said, but she has a process for kind of, here are the things that I might want to deal with, here are the things that I definitely don't want to deal with, and here are the things I'm going to wrestle with for a while.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying is that same idea, like somewhere take all that feedback and think about it for a while.
Yeah.
But then process it for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And
Don't just do what someone gives you as an example of what might be an idea.
Yeah, that you want to, and I think about it as integrating. Like, you don't want to, and I also, frankly, when it comes to revision, I don't want students fiddling with their draft. And I made a case for this of sort of, this is a draft, and I often, especially moving from a first draft to the next draft, will completely, I will work with the printed version of the first draft, but I won't work in the same document because it's too tempting to keep stuff that's okay. And instead I re-enter and rewrite scene by scene the scenes that I want to keep. But if I have a scene I'm not sure is working, I won't retype it. I won't bring it into the book, the next version of the book, because I don't want, we have a harder time taking things out. So it's something that raises skepticism for some people because it sounds inefficient, but I think it's actually, we waste a lot of time rereading work and we get the feeling that it's pretty good, when in fact, when it's printed out and it's there and we're making the decision, do I add this into this next draft or do I set it aside knowing I could always rescue it later? It's a lot easier to make the decision to set it aside for now and build something better, or you've cut something that wasn't essential. This is coming from the person who overwrites by like 150%. So I will write 250,000 words to get a 100,000 word novel. So I always have plenty to throw away. Other writers who are more economical, maybe this is not a good idea for them. But
that's a great, I love to hear about your process, and to know you write a lot and you're actually re-keying that next draft.
And I usually do that like 3 times, like not just the first time.
Where do the revision notes to yourself and from your critique partners come in that re-keying process?
Yeah. No, I would usually have, my first draft, I do have something like I don't even think of as a draft. It's like a 0 draft, and it's just scenes and ideas and possibilities. It's the kind of headspace where I go back and forth, like, he has a twin. No, he doesn't have a twin. He doesn't have a brother at all. No, they're Irish twins. Or, I have this sort of period of not yet having settled on the circumstances of my character's world. And so I consider all of that important, but it's not really writing the book. It's feeling into it. It's playing around. It's like a sandbox. And I generally don't show anybody that stuff. I might pull out a scene and ask somebody for feedback on it. But once I have a first draft that actually moves in whatever way from, what I imagine as the beginning of a book to the end, I only have a couple of people I would ask to read something like that. And I usually at that point, like, I will cool it off. I'll set it aside maybe for 3 weeks, and I will look at it again myself, because usually there are things I already know about what I want to do before I ask somebody else to read it, and also before I introduce somebody else into the process, because I'm a pretty I don't know a good way to say it. I have intuition about what I'm trying to do that's very particular, but not necessarily going to be gestated enough in that first draft for somebody else to see it and value it. And so I'm very careful about who I show it to, because it's probably not working in that first draft, and it's probably not even, I'm probably not even doing enough of the right things for them to get why it feels so important. And so often what I'm really doing after a first draft is finding the scenes that I can identify that really belong in the book, the kinds of things that belong in the book. So, for example, in Out of Darkness, what is the prologue now is something that I wrote very early on. And although I didn't know where it was going to be in the book, I knew the book I was writing was a book where that piece belonged. And it's, it's a description of the explosion, and, it's important and does some important things, but it was more about tone and sensibility and dramatic stakes. And so what I do after the first draft is to try to discern for myself, what are the scenes that feel like they tell me what kind of a book this is.
Mm-hmm.
And I often do that even when I'm writing the first draft. Like I have a piece like that I keep going back to, and I'm like, okay, this scene doesn't match that, but I'm gonna try to write in a way that seems like they're closer to being in the same book. And it kind of helps me have a target. But after the first draft, I'm hoping I've got, 6 or even 10 scenes that I think might really be in the book. And then otherwise, what I have is a narrative arc that I can work with. And that's where then I might have a trusted reader look at those scenes. I might talk through the whole story with someone. But what I would be doing by printing out the draft would be more marking for myself. These are I would for sure use those scenes that I'm actually going to have. But the scenes that I've written something, but it's not what I really want in the book, instead of retyping that scene, I'm trying to write the scene that actually belongs in the same book as those pieces that I trust. And that's really what it is. It's as if there are scenes that I've created that I trust, like that feel true, that feel like they belong, and then a bunch that kind of like are masquerading. And those, I'm like, thanks for coming to the dress rehearsal, but
those are the ones that don't get retyped.
Those are the ones that don't get retyped. Yeah, and it doesn't mean that they didn't teach me something. Like I learned something, but there's I have a lot of waste in my writing process, and I've accepted the fact that I'm not a person who can see the correct path, the shortest correct path from the starting point. I have to make this long journey around, and then when I'm standing at this other point, I can look back and see another way.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's my first draft. That really may not involve much reader input, and then I hope that I write something that's more consistent, and that it's usually around the second or third draft that I'm going to give it to my friend Elisa, or I might give it to Andrew Carr, my editor, and to have a conversation about where we think we would go in the next revision. And that's one of the nice things about selling books before you've written them, is that you get to have, or I've gotten to have, this access to editorial input so much earlier in the process. I mean, Andrew and I talk about the book that I haven't written, all the time, and that's really helpful, especially when I'm doing the kind of exploring and gathering material and thinking that I hope will let me tackle something that will, push the boundary outward, or do something Way hasn't done quite that way before.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, it's nice to have an editor who is as patient with slowness as Andrew is. And he knows that I have a professor hat, and I have my author hat and my mom hat, and but I think even with his authors who write even with the authors he works with who write full time, I think he is more interested in what kind of original thing can we create together than how fast is it getting done.
Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about your professorship, what you're teaching, and then talk to me a little bit about how you put writing into your life as mom, as professor, and author.
I'm a professor at Ohio State University, the Ohio State University, and I teach mostly world literature courses. I also teach our graduate literary theory course, and so I'm not a writing professor. I mean, I am a professor who writes, but I'm not in an MFA program or a creative writing program, and So that makes it's a really interesting and exciting kind of fit for me, because I do a lot of critical work in my professional life, and I bring that into my if I'm giving a keynote about wearing my author hat, it's completely inflected by my kind of commitments as a literary critic too. And I think it always is helpful to me as, as a teacher of other writers, or in my own work with my writing, that I have a wide range of influences. I also work with a lot of pre-service teachers, so a lot of students at Ohio State who want to be secondary English teachers. They have to take a world literature course, and they have to take a young adult literature course. And so one of the things I love is that and it's happened in both orders. At Ohio State, a number of the people who teach YA literature teach Out of Darkness. And so I'll have students who either have read Out of Darkness take my World Lit course, or students take my World Lit course and then they take the YA class and they read Out of Darkness. And there's a really, I don't talk about my own fiction when I'm teaching literature, but it's fun to see how they connect what we've done in reading the literature with how they read YA, and it's specifically like Out of Darkness. So I teach books that I love, and one of the books that I teach is The God of Small Things in my World Lit class, and it's one of the books that I read over and over when I was writing Out of Darkness. And so students often notice resonances between the books. Not the obvious things like The God of Small Things has twins and Out of Darkness has twins. Like that's easy, but there are more subtle things that they pick up on, and it's really interesting to me because that's the only time that's ever happened, is when it's students that I've taught and they're reading those two books. So
it's as if they're learning critical literary theory and comparison.
Yeah. It's and I am in a comparative studies department, so I do a lot of teaching comparative skills. And then where the writing fits, there's a reason why it's been 4 years since my last novel was published. It's been, I've accomplished a lot of things, a beautiful second son, and a lot of things that are important for my academic career. But what I am proud of is keeping the flame alive and maintaining my identity as a writer. And how I do that, I tend to write to honor the time that I can write, and to try not to minimize the importance of the time I can make. So my suggestions to people who are also working in writing and perhaps also working in demanding jobs and jobs that also have projects like articles and books, is to make a practice of giving, at least on 3 days of the week, their best hour to the project they care about most. And that's still very small, but 3 hours is also enough time. And 3 hours on 3 different days is enough time to get something done, and more importantly, it helps you keep the clay warm, so you don't,
Right.
And I unfortunately I have had the experience. That's always my aspiration. I have had the experience of projects that I care about, really having to be, first put on the back burner and then sort of covered and put in the fridge, and then no, am I gonna have to put this in the freezer? And those are simply things that happen, and I think as long as we recognize that the work still matters, it is ours, and we are the same creators who began that project and cared about that project, and we can bring it back to the stove, then there's nothing lost. I think sometimes we have a lot of stories, and I know I have a lot of stories about what it means to have paused a project, or to have decided that, this project is not what I can do right now. And I'm working really hard to get outside of the stories, because they're usually not very helpful. And if we're matter of fact, like my novel's on ice right now. I know what to do. I know how to take something out of the freezer, defrost it, and then work with it. Like, I can do that, instead of making it some kind of personal failing. So I am proud. I mean, I'm proud of myself for taking all the time that I can for the writing, and being peaceful about how much time that is.
And I appreciate that you are trying to find those hours that you can honor your practice, but that you're being at peace with it.
Yeah, and I do things like I teach in the fall. This will be my 3rd year, might be my 4th year teaching it. I'll teach a creative habit class, and so I have a group of brand new first year students, 17 or 18 kids, and I take them through, like, every week we're focusing on something a little bit different, but we have a daily, like a 5-minute daily creative practice. So like there's Linda Berry has it's actually called the 6-minute diary, a great practice, and I always do that with them. And so that's something, every time I teach that class, I'm kind of I'm teaching the students, and I'm reminding myself that bringing creativity into the lives that we're living has value regardless of the products, and it always helps me when I'm doing that practice. I find it much easier to move into the space of getting a scene or two done, and then I'm thinking, I'm got my brain with my characters more. So I think it's one of the most important things for people balancing work and family and writing, is to not underestimate the importance of the time that they do have. And my first book, What Can't Wait, I wrote in like 30 minutes a day before I would go teach high school, and then I would sneak away on Saturdays for like 2 hours. So, I mean, that was not, and I guess I would write in the classroom. When my students were writing, I would try to write too, but it was a lot of stolen minutes. It wasn't a lot of big, it wasn't writing half a day every day. And I really am grateful for that experience, because I found the time, and I think that we can find the time. I think we sometimes get discouraged at the pace, but the pace is what the pace is.
And be at peace with that, so that the creativity can happen. Because
really, the thing we do, the way we shoot ourselves in the foot most, is to set bars, set unachievable expectations, and then feel dissatisfied with what we've done, when what we should be doing is celebrating that we did something. And so I worked really hard on that kind of changing the narrative, and I think in my handout on the revision stuff, I have, I make people write down like the treats that they can give themselves when they finish a writing session or a revision session. That, especially for revision, it's important, because when you're drafting, you have the hit of like, I just wrote 500 words, or I just wrote 200 words. And when you're revising, it's like, oh, wow, I deleted 30 words and I wrote some new words, and like, it's not very tangible. So you need to be able to reward yourself for having shown up to the job and worked on it in an intentional way. There should be pieces of chocolate or bubble tea or a nice walk with a friend, or I don't know, like a nice new pen or a notebook that's got some sparkle to it. Like those things, I think, it's such a small, we spend so much more on things that give us so much less than what we might get from a little bit of kind of strategic rewards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that the idea of it's so much more fun to create that draft and to be making new than
Oh, God.
revising.
No.
That seems to be pretty common.
That's common. That is actually not me at all. I hate the first draft. It's the most terrifying. See, and that's why I have to like work with the revision thing when I talk about it, because I'm like, you guys are so lucky. You have a draft. I am so jealous. You get to revise. And there's just like this look of like, what are you talking about? So I have to do this sort of strategic pep talk of like, it's really exciting that you have a draft because now you have something to revise, but also helping people see that revision is a ton of new writing.
Mm-hmm.
It still is full of new things as the first draft. Just where you're doing that new writing in a kind of more of a, it's like you're filling it. If you build the structure with the first draft, or part of the structure, because part of it's going to be like broken down and all wrong, but you've built a structure, and then you're trying out like the next stage. That's so exciting to me. It's like you have an idea, like I gave the example of the cake. You're making a cake. You're not making a pie. You're not making, cupcakes. You have some ideas about what you're doing, and then you have some constraints. For me, the first draft is terrifying and just so hard. And once I have even that draft, like I said, that I'm basically saying most of this is not words that are going to be in the book, I feel I have something there, so I don't have that terror of there's nothing. But I do hear from these people, like you speak of, who like the first draft is so fun, an adventure, and then revision is
How are your students doing this week? Have they given you feedback on whether they're grooving on their revisions or stuck on them?
I think there will be a reckoning tomorrow, and we'll see where we need to send them off to. But I've had several conversations, and I like to have students send me, like if they're trying something out in a scene and they want a little bit of feedback. So I'm seeing little glimpses of what's happening and where what we talked about in the one-on-ones is coming into what they're revising. I love to get excited with the students about what they're doing. And so I had, for example, a conversation this morning where after the work we did in the one-on-ones, imagining how this writer could incorporate material that she wanted her character to know about her childhood, but in a way that would be have kind of a visceral quality, like an embodied experience, not sort of here's a story about her when she was a little girl. As I saw her working with that material, and she sort of turned me from a skeptic to a believer in an idea she had about writing a memory from very, very early in this character's life. And in fact, by the end of our conversation this morning, I was so excited about it that I was almost jealous that I didn't get to be the one to write, a scene where a character's remembering her own birth. Because what we needed to bridge was the gap between the idea and then the sort of the expectations that were being established in the novel as far as like what kind of world this is. So I needed her to think about like, it's not that this has to happen by magic, but there has to be a way that spaces and particular people in this novel enable possibilities that are just a reach beyond what we would see in typical realistic fiction. And that's exciting because that's experimenting and pushing the frontier of this manuscript outward. So I completely geek out over conversations like that. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see where writers have ended up when we talk tomorrow, and I'm also excited to sort of follow them forward. I always keep an eye out for the students I've had at highlights because I want them to keep being
go forth and create.
That's right, and really hold on to their identity as writers, and hopefully have great writing friendships with other people they meet here. because it's a great place to find a writing accountability group or critique group. And as you know, perhaps my dear friend Elisa Allering and I met at a writing workshop like 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and that was one of the, I still remember some things I learned at the workshop, but like scoring a trusted reader and a friend just sort of like, I don't know, I've been, like the value of that over time is not to be underestimated.
It's that community and those relationships
Yeah,
that
and
stick
you
with
guys
you.
do such a great job encouraging community here. I think it's really good. Really
Well, thank you. Ashley, this has been great.
Yeah.
So
you're like, oh my gosh, Ashley, 10 minutes. Seriously, I can talk forever.
this is perfect. So hold on. So before we leave,
You're like,
first I
wait a
want to
minute,
say
Ashley.
thank you, Ashley Hope
course.
Perez, for joining us on Into the Words here at the Highlights Foundation Retreat Center. We are dedicated to continuing our 35-year history of providing the space, the conversations, and the nurturing that goes into making great stories for children. So thank you for everything you do to support the Highlights Foundation. And more importantly, thank you for everything else you do to support that belief that children are the world's most important people.
Yeah.